Obsidian Spears, The Breaking Wave. Part 1. 12 Years Lost. The Imperium had broken. Not quietly or insidiously, but with a shattering cataclysmic roar that tore reality apart. My brothers and I, locked away in the timeless currents of the warp, were spared the initial screams, the rending of the very fabric of reality. But the silence that followed, the silence of a galaxy that had moved on, was far more chilling. When the great rift tore open, reality itself ruptured. We felt it, even within the deep void of the strike cruiser, Tetoka Ahi. It wasn't a physical impact, but a psychic scream, a rending of the soul fabric of the cosmos that reverberated through every fiber of my being, every neuron in my enhanced brain. The Jella field, usually a comforting hum against the gnawing chaos, shrieked and groaned, its integrity flickering like a dying candle. Lights flickered on the bridge, alarms blared, and the very deck beneath my ceramite boots seemed to twist and writhe. Our ancestral ocean world of Tuarua, a beacon of stability and tradition, vanished behind a veil of warp storms and Imperian turbulence. We were cut off, adrift, swallowed whole by the galaxy's sudden violent convulsion. More critically, the Astronomicon, that guiding beacon of the Emperor's will that pierced the Immaterium, winked out. Our navigator, Kale, screamed as the light in his third eye extinguished, replaced by a blinding, chaotic void. Without that sacred light, we were truly lost, cast adrift in the swirling, malevolent maelstrom of raw, unbridled chaos. For 12 years in real space, our strike cruiser, Tetoka Ahi, carrying the third and fifth companies of the Obsidian Spears, drifted trapped within shifting warp currents. Time within the Immaterium is a cruel jester, a concept warped and twisted beyond recognition. To my brothers and me, it felt like only 5 months. 5 months of endless grey-tinged void, of stars that bled and shifted, of the constant low thrum of the Geller field struggling against unseen horrors. We maintained our vigils, trained, prayed, and performed the rituals of our chapter, but a subtle, insidious erosion began. The sense of urgency, the sharp edge of battle readiness, dulled into a weary patience. We spoke of home, of the missions we would undertake upon our return, but the words felt increasingly hollow, echoes in an empty chamber. The warp currents were not violent in the way a storm in real space might be. They were insidious, a slow, grinding pressure that tested not our hull but our sanity. We saw visions sometimes of futures that never were, or pasts that never happened. Whispers slithered at the edges of our thoughts, tempting, corrupting, but the discipline of the Obsidian Spears, forged in the crushing depths of Tuarua's oceans, held firm. We were tested, but we did not break. Even our mortal Kaukiri crew stayed true. When we finally returned, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The transition was jarring. One moment, the sickly, swirling hues of the warp. The next, the sharp, cold brilliance of real space stars. But these stars were not aligned as they should be. The constellations were askew, entire swaths of the galactic map missing, replaced by vast, inky voids. The Tetoka Ahi emerged into a graveyard of light, and then we saw it. Across the galactic plane, stretching like a colossal, festering wound, lay the Great Rift. It was not merely a dark void, but an ugly, shifting blur of impossible colors and chaotic energies. To the west, it appeared as a tainted scar, a purple-black gash against the familiar starscape. But to the east, where we found ourselves, it was far worse. A seething whirlpool of raw, malevolent magic, a glimpse into the very realm of chaos. It pulsed with nauseating light, a monstrous, ever-changing tear that bled demonic energies into real space. It was the Cicatrix Maledictum, the cursed scar, and it had split the Imperium in half. My first act was to try and hail the familiar sector-wide channels, the long-range Vox frequencies we had used for centuries to communicate with Segmentum Command, with allied chapters, with the myriad Imperial agencies that formed the backbone of the Imperium. But there was only static, a dead silence that spoke of broken links and severed connections. Or worse, garbled, desperate pleas from systems I barely recognized, their coordinates screaming of invasion, plague, or utter annihilation. The star charts on the bridge flickered, their once vibrant green and gold markers of Imperial control now replaced by vast, unsettling voids, black holes of information where entire subsectors should have been. Whole sectors were dark, silent, their populations presumably consumed by the encroaching shadows of the Great Rift. Imperial communications fractured, reduced to local chatter, isolated islands in a storm-tossed sea. Old alliances forged in blood and fire over millennia had shattered, leaving former comrades in arms suspicious and hostile. The Imperium did not welcome us back. Our first contact was not with a relief fleet, not with a grateful chapter master, but with the muzzle flash of a macro cannon. A patrol cruiser, bearing the heraldry of the Imperial Navy, opened fire without warning as we attempted to identify ourselves. Our vox-hails, clear and precise, were met with a torrent of accusations. Heretic! Traitors! Abominations from the warp! Guns fired first. Questions came later, if they came at all, usually from the barrel of a bolter. We were forced to defend ourselves, to disable their vessels without destruction, to prove our loyalty through restraint in the face of their unreasoning hatred. It was a bitter, bewildering homecoming, a stark reminder that the galaxy we had left behind was gone, replaced by a stranger that saw only threat in our return. We were ghosts, returned from a forgotten war, and the living Imperium had no place for us. Part 2. Ash-like memory. My mission was clear. Locate any functional astropathic relay, no matter how remote, and attempt to send a signal to Tuarua. We had returned to a galaxy that no longer knew us, and our first priority was to ascertain the fate of our home world. The data we gathered from fragmented Imperial vox bursts and the ancient star charts aboard the Titoka Ahi pointed to relay site Theta Vox as a prime candidate. It was a long-range node, established millennia ago to link this forgotten sector to the wider Imperium, but its isolation meant it might have escaped the worst of the galactic turmoil. It was a desperate hope, a fragile thread in a tapestry of ruin, but hope nonetheless. Without a connection to Tuarua, our journey back would be incomplete, our purpose unfulfilled. The thought of my homeworld, of the deep, clear oceans and the towering coral cities, was a constant burning ember in my mind. I moved like the hush before a wave break, my black armor coral-scarred, through the drifting ash of relay site Theta Vox. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and decay, a grim perfume of a world left to rot. Each step raised a fine cloud of grey-white powder, clinging to my ceramite, dulling its obsidian sheen. It felt like walking through the ghost of a world, a place where life had once thrived, now reduced to particulate memory. The ash itself was peculiar, too fine for rock, too uniform for mere dust. It spoke of immense localized destruction, perhaps a planetary bombardment, or the residue of some terrible warp-spawned cataclysm. I tasted it on the filtered air of my helmet, metallic and bitter. A taste of death. Dust-coated broken comm spires, their skeletal frames reaching uselessly towards the sky, like withered fingers begging for a signal that would never come. Rusted gantries, once bustling arteries of commerce, now hung precariously, groaning in the faint, unseen wind. Buckled tramways, their rails twisted into grotesque knots, lay half-buried, monuments to a forgotten age of industry. The warehouse complex ahead loomed like a half-buried reef, cracked steel, hanging cables, shattered runestones. It was a familiar sight, the standard Imperial industrial architecture, but here it was infused with an unsettling stillness, a silence broken only by the faint, distant hum of my armor's systems. Above, the void churned with warp-lit false stars, a constant, unsettling reminder of the veil we had just passed through. These were not the steady, comforting lights of real space, but flickering, malevolent pinpricks of raw chaos, a cosmic infection that had spread across the galaxy. My auspex, usually a reliable eye into the unseen, whispered with unexpected data. Multiple armored life signs, human, disciplined. A cold knot tightened in my gut. This site was meant to be abandoned, a forgotten outpost on the fringes of a forgotten sector. Our intelligence, compiled from ancient charts and the desperate whispers of the void, indicated no active Imperial presence. Why were there guards? Had the Imperium re-established control in this desolate corner, or was some other, more sinister force at play? My mind raced through possibilities. Renegades, Xenos raiders, perhaps even a nascent cult drawn to the lingering warp taint. Each scenario presented its own unique threat, its own set of protocols. Yet footprints marred the ash. Recent, heavy, not the light, sporadic tracks of scavengers, nor the deep, regular imprints of a long-term garrison. These were the fresh, purposeful marks of a patrol, moving with a disciplined tread that spoke of military training. My suspicion sharpened. This was not a chance encounter. Someone was here and they were guarding something. The relay itself, perhaps, or something else entirely. I activated the dampening protocols on my armor, not to cloak myself, but to minimize any mechanical sound, to ensure my movements were as silent as possible. The faint hum of my servos, usually a barely perceptible vibration, ceased entirely. My movements became utterly silent, my heavy ceramite boots now gliding over the ash without a whisper. I slipped into shadow, a predator in a world of ghosts, my hand instinctively going to the hilt of my ritual dagger. Whatever was here, it was not what I expected, and it would not deter me from my purpose. The fate of Twarua, and perhaps the future of the Obsidian Spears, depended on my success. I moved with the patience of the deep ocean, every sense honed, every muscle coiled, ready to strike or to vanish as the situation demanded. The air grew colder as I approached the warehouse, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the external temperature and everything to do with the unseen eyes that now watched this desolate place. I could feel their presence, a faint psychic resonance, a prickle on my enhanced senses. They were close, too close for comfort. My objective was the relay console, likely deep within the complex. I would have to navigate this unexpected obstacle course with extreme caution. The ash, once merely an environmental detail, now became an ally, its soft embrace muffling any stray sound, its uniform grey a perfect camouflage for my dark armor. I was part of the ruin, a shadow among shadows, moving towards an uncertain future. Part 3. Silent Hunter. The first patrol never saw me. I had observed their routine from a vantage point high above, perched on the rusted skeleton of a collapsed comm gantry. My enhanced vision cut through the perpetual twilight of this ash-choked world, mapping their predictable circuit. 3 men moving with the heavy rhythmic tread of Imperial Guard or local PDF, their laser guns held at the low ready. They were cask enforcers, their crude reinforced flak armor and standard-issue weaponry marking them as local security, likely conscripted or pressed into service by whatever authority now claimed this ruin. Their discipline was adequate for a human patrol, but insufficient for a true threat. They moved with the complacency of men who believed themselves alone in the wasteland. I waited, a statue of black ceramite against the grey-black sky, until the last man in the patrol passed directly beneath my position. Then, with the silent grace of a deep-sea predator, I dropped. My landing was a controlled crouch behind a rusted mag hauler, a derelict cargo vehicle that offered ample concealment. The slight tremor of my descent was absorbed by the thick layer of ash, leaving no trace. As the patrol continued its slow, measured progress, I ghosted up behind the last trooper. He was a stocky man, his helmet obscuring his face, but I could hear the rhythmic rasp of his breath through his rebreather. My gauntlet, reinforced with adamantium, wrapped around his throat, cutting off his air supply and his ability to cry out. I lifted him effortlessly, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the ash-covered ground. The struggle was brief, a silent, desperate thrashing. His body went limp, unconsciousness claiming him. No blood, no noise. I laid him gently behind the mag hauler, out of sight, and adjusted the ash around his form to erase any sign of his fall. His 2 comrades a few paces ahead continued their patrol, oblivious to the silent removal of their rear guard. They rounded a bend in the ruined gantry, their conversation a low murmur I struck. The lead enforcer, a tall, gaunt man, felt a sudden crushing pressure on his neck, his world spinning as I twisted him around and drove a precise, concussive blow to his temple. He crumpled without a sound, his laser gun clattering harmlessly against the ash. The third man, a burly individual, reacted with surprising speed, raising his weapon. But I was faster. My hand shot out, seizing the barrel of his laser gun, twisting it from his grasp with a wrenching force that tore the weapon from his hands. Before he could recover, my other gauntlet delivered a sharp, focused strike to his solar plexus. The air exploded from his lungs in a choked gasp, and he folded in on himself, collapsing to the ground, unconscious but breathing. I carried both men into the same concealed space as their comrade, ensuring their bodies were hidden and their weapons secured. 3 down. The first obstacle cleared. I moved on, my path now a deliberate dance through the ruins. The complex was a labyrinth of decay, but my internal cartograph system, constantly updated by my Auspex scans, provided a clear route to the central relay station. I vaulted over rusted beams, their cold, pitted surfaces scraping softly against my armor. I dropped low, sliding through dust-choked corridors, the fine ash swirling around my legs like a ghostly tide. The air was heavy, stagnant, tasting of rust and old fear. Each shadow was a potential hiding place, each pile of rubble a vantage point. My senses were heightened, processing every creak of metal, every distant echo, every subtle shift in the air currents. I was a part of this ruin, a silent hunter moving through its dead heart. My tactics were precise, non-lethal strikes designed to incapacitate quickly and cleanly. I had no quarrel with these men, mere cogs in a machine I did not yet understand. Nerve holds, applied with the crushing strength of my gauntlets, sent jolts of agony through their systems, rendering them immobile. Precise joint locks, twisting limbs beyond their natural limits, forced submission without breaking bone. Concussive blows, delivered with the flat of my armored hand or the reinforced shoulder of my pauldron, knocked the wind from their lungs and the sense from their minds. I left no dead, only sleeping. It was a testament to the control I exerted over my enhanced strength, a restraint born of centuries of training, a discipline ingrained by the tides of Tuarua. We did not spill blood unnecessarily, even in this fractured Imperium. One by one, the cask enforcers fell silent. A squad of 4 patrolling a wide open plaza was dispatched in less than 20 seconds. I used the cover of a collapsed wall, then the shadow cast by a towering broken crane. One fell to a swift choke, his partner to a knee strike that buckled his leg and sent him sprawling. The remaining 2, startled by the sudden silence, turned just as I emerged from the gloom. Their laser guns spat, but my ceramite absorbed the energy bolts harmlessly. I closed the distance in a blur, a gauntlet slamming into one man's chest, knocking the breath from him and sending him flying into a pile of debris. The last man, his eyes wide with terror, tried to bring his weapon to bear, but I was already there. A precise, open-handed strike to his temple, rendering him unconscious before he could even register the impact. I dragged them into the deeper shadows, ensuring their bodies were concealed, their weapons secured. Further in, I encountered a pair guarding a heavy blast door. They were more vigilant, their conversation low, their posture tense. I heard their vox chatter, fragmented and distorted, but enough to confirm they were expecting something, or someone. This added a layer of urgency to my infiltration. I needed to be inside before whatever they were expecting arrived. I circled wide, using the skeletal remains of a collapsed pipe network as cover. The pipes were slick with condensation, and the air here was colder, carrying a faint metallic tang that spoke of active machinery. I scaled the pipes, my magnetic boots finding purchase on the corroded metal, moving directly above them. As they shifted their backs momentarily to each other, I dropped. One fell to a swift, silent blow to the base of the skull. The other, alerted by the sudden lack of his comrade's presence, spun, but too late. My boot connected with his jaw, a clean, precise strike that sent him into immediate unconsciousness. I secured them both, their weapons added to the growing pile of confiscated gear. The deeper I went, the more signs of recent activity I found. Tools left carelessly on workbenches, faint scorch marks on the floor from energy weapons, the lingering scent of processed rations. This was not merely a patrol. This was an active occupation. My Auspex began to pick up stronger energy signatures, consistent with larger, more powerful weaponry and the distinct heavier tread of power armor. Astartes. My suspicions were confirmed. This was not a simple Imperial outpost. This was a contested zone, and I was now deep within enemy lines. My objective, the astropathic relay, had become significantly more complicated, but the thought of Tuarua, of the long journey home, hardened my resolve. I would reach that console, I would send that signal no matter the cost. My next steps would need to be even more precise, even more silent. The game had changed. Part 4. Contact. I stepped through the warehouse threshold, the heavy blast door groaning shut behind me, sealing me within the cavernous space. The air inside was colder, still and heavy with the dust of ages. Yet beneath it, I detected the faint metallic tang of ozone and the subtle hum of active machinery. My Auspex confirmed it. The relay console was directly ahead, a massive, multi-tiered structure dominating the far end of the cavernous space, its data slates flickering with a faint, internal light. The warehouse itself loomed like a skeletal corpse beneath the twilight filtering through shattered skylights. Metal bones rusted, cable tendons swaying like kelp in a deep-sea current. I moved in silence, my obsidian armor dulled by ash and gravdust, a shadow among shadows. My warplate bore gouges and sea-worn etchings, marks of 1,000 battles and the corrosive touch of the warp. But the spearhead on my pauldron, the glyph of the Obsidian Spears, shone clear, a defiant symbol in this forgotten place. No warning, no vox hail, just the sudden raw violence of the Imperium. Bolter fire erupted from above, a thunderous roar that echoed through the vast space, followed by the tearing shriek of rounds ripping through the air. My enhanced reflexes, honed over centuries of conflict, reacted instantly. I dove behind the nearest pillar, a colossal ferrocrete support column, as heavy caliber rounds slammed into the concrete where I had stood mere milliseconds before. The impact sent chips of rockcrete exploding outwards, spraying ash and dust. A voice, amplified by a voxcaster, snarled from the upper gantry, "Heretic Astartes contact, unknown heraldry, engage." Heretic. The word was a familiar sting, a brand burned into our return. They saw only the unfamiliar, the unexpected, and immediately condemned. The heraldry they spoke of, the Red Talons on black, was now clear. These were the Red Talons, a second founding successor of the Iron Hands. I knew their reputation. Fierce, uncompromising, almost pathologically driven to hunt down what they perceived as traitors and renegades. They were born from the most aggressive and volatile elements of their parent legion, forged in the crucible of the Great Scouring, and possessed a grim, unyielding purpose. To them, any space marine not immediately identifiable, especially one emerging from the warp, was a threat to be eradicated. Their methods were direct, brutal, and utterly without mercy for those they deemed enemies of the Imperium. They would not question, they would simply destroy. Before I could even formulate a counter-move, a thunderous crash echoed as a Red Talon in full Mark 7 plate dropped from above, a heavy assault marine, his power fist crackling with raw energy. He landed with bone-jarring force, the ferrocrete floor groaning beneath his weight, and immediately lunged. I surged forward, no bolter, no time to draw my own weapon, and intercepted the descending warrior. My shoulder, reinforced ceramite backed by transhuman strength, slammed into his chest plate. The impact was a sickening crunch, a sound that would have pulped a lesser man. He was driven back, through the pillar I had just used for cover, the wall behind it exploding in a cloud of dust and shattered rockcrete. Efficient, I thought, as he recovered with surprising speed, but predictable. This Red Talon was a brute, relying on overwhelming force rather than finesse. He was already roaring, his power fist swinging in a wide, crushing arc designed to pulverize. I ducked beneath the swing, the crackling field of his fist passing inches above my helm, the air around it shimmering with contained energy. I pivoted, using his own momentum against him, and hammered a gauntlet into the Talon's elbow joint. The ceramite of his arm guard shrieked, shearing servos and splintering under the focused impact of my strike. He roared again, a sound of pain and rage, and tried to grapple, his good arm reaching for me. I met his charge with a headbutt, my reinforced helm slamming into his faceplate. The impact reverberated through my skull, but his helmet buckled and his movements faltered. Seizing the opportunity, I dragged him into a brutal hip throw, using his own weight against him, and slammed him down onto the ferrocrete floor. As he lay stunned, I brought my armored boot down, crushing his arm at the joint with a sickening crack. He screamed a raw, animalistic sound and then went limp, non-lethal, barely. I had no desire to kill a loyalist, even one misguided by fear and dogma. My instincts flared. More hostiles. A trio of cask enforcers, alerted by the commotion, breached a mezzanine door on the far side of the warehouse. They were armed with shock mauls, their tips sparking with contained energy, and las carbines chattering, spitting coherent light. They were clearly terrified, but their training held. I advanced, ignoring the incoming las fire. A bolt hit my gorget. Harmless, the energy dissipating against my ceramite. I didn't waste time with them. My objective was the relay, and these were mere distractions. I kicked the rusted railing of the mezzanine walkway with a precise, powerful strike. The corroded metal shrieked, then snapped free, toppling the first enforcer down with a scream that ended abruptly as he hit the ground far below. I caught another mid-swing, his shock maul sparking uselessly against my gauntlet, and slammed him into the ferrocrete floor with a bone-jarring impact. He lay twitching, his body spasming from the shock. Then I spun, my leg moving in a blur, and shattered the last man's kneecap with a sweeping kick. He collapsed, clutching his leg, his face contorted in agony. They were down, neutralized. But the Astartes threat remained. Another Space Marine, this one in blackened Mark VI armor, rushed me from the shadows near the relay console. He was faster, more agile than the first, and wielded a chain blade that roared to life, its adamantium teeth spinning with a hungry whine. This was a close-quarters specialist, likely a veteran of countless boarding actions. I met his charge, catching the roaring blade on my vambrace. The adamantium teeth gritted against my ceramite, carving deep gouges, sending a shower of sparks into the gloom. The vibration ran up my arm, a jarring tremor, but my armor held. With my offhand, I drove my ritual dagger, a blade of sharpened obsidian, into the Marine's hip joint, seeking the vulnerable servo motors and neural bundles. I twisted, feeling the resistance, then the give, as ceramite cracked and the mechanism seized. The Talon roared, a sound of frustrated fury, and tried to bring his chain blade around for another strike, but his movements were hampered. I headbutted the warrior, a brutal, focused impact that sent him staggering into a generator bank. The impact lit the whole room in stuttering sparks, the generator protesting with a shower of electrical discharge. He lay there, twitching amidst the arcing electricity, his chain blade still whining, but his movements uncoordinated. Smoke curled from the damaged generator. My warplate steamed from the exertion, the internal cooling systems working overtime to dissipate the heat generated by my rapid, powerful movements. My auspex chirped, warning me of new contacts. Two more Red Talons approached from opposite flanks, moving with practiced coordination. One was a formidable sight, wielding a heavy boarding shield and a hammer, a defensive bulwark. The other was a blur of motion, dual knives glinting in the dim light, a deadly duelist. No words, no mercy. Their intent was clear. They would not stop until I was dead. This was the Red Talons' way, relentless, brutal, driven by an almost fanatical hatred of any perceived enemy. I dropped low, sliding beneath the shield-bearer's guard before he could bring his massive shield to bear. My uppercut, delivered with the full force of my leg and torso, slammed into his chin, snapping the mag-locked helmet free with a sickening crack. It flew through the air, clattering against a distant wall. As he reeled, disoriented, the knife fighter came in, fast, his blades a silver blur. One sliced across my gorget, the impact sending sparks flying and a thin line of blood welling from a hairline crack in the ceramite. I grunted, the pain a distant thrum, and rolled back onto a stack of discarded crates, using the momentum to spring upwards. As the knife fighter leapt after me, anticipating a direct engagement, I drove my feet upward, a powerful inverted kick that caught him squarely in the chest. He let out a choked cry, flipping over me in an arc, and crashed headfirst into an overhead pipe with a dull thud. He slumped unconscious, entangled in dangling cables. The shield-bearer recovered, roaring, his face now exposed, contorted in a snarl of rage. He brought his hammer down in a desperate overhead strike, aiming to crush me. I caught the haft mid-air, the power field of the hammer crackling against my gauntlet. We wrestled for control, a momentary deadlock of transhuman strength. I gritted my teeth, straining, then yanked him forward, pulling him off balance, and delivered a brutal elbow strike smashed his face. He gurgled, collapsing. I wrenched the hammer free, its power field flickering and dying, and hurled it across the room with a final furious heave. It spun end over end, embedding itself with a resounding clang into a steel pillar, vibrating with the force of the impact. Alarms wailed throughout the complex, a piercing, insistent shriek that signaled a full alert. Reinforcements inbound, my auspex confirmed, a full company perhaps, converging on my position. I had achieved my objective, or was close to it. This prolonged engagement was no longer necessary. Enough. I stood over the broken form of the last conscious Red Talon, the shield-bearer who lay gasping, his face battered, one hand raised weakly in defiance. I stared down at him, silent, breathing heavily, my systems still steaming from the exertion. His gaze, even through the ruined visor, was filled with hatred and a desperate, dying defiance. The talon spat, a bloody fleck hitting my ceramite pauldron, rasping, "Whatever you are, you die here." I crouched, my voice low, a deep rumble from my vox grill resonating with the ancient wisdom of my chapter. "You see betrayal in every shadow. That's why you miss the real enemy." My words were not for him alone, but for the entire fractured Imperium. They were so consumed by their internal strife, by their fear of the unknown, that they failed to see the true threats, the deeper corruptions that gnawed at their very foundations. The Talon tried to curse, a guttural sound, but choked on blood, his strength fading. I rose, my purpose fulfilled. I would not linger. I melted into the deeper shadows, relying on my speed, my agility, and the sheer chaos of the moment to make my escape. The thundering footsteps of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of new reinforcements echoed through the warehouse, their bolters already raised, their shouts of, "For the Emperor," ringing hollow in the ash-filled air. They would find only unconscious bodies and a mystery. 5. The echo of Tuarua. The alarms continued to wail, a shrill, insistent shriek that grated even on my enhanced auditory senses. The thundering footsteps of the approaching Red Talons grew louder, their vox chatter a cacophony of enraged commands and frustrated oaths. I could hear the heavy thud of power-armored boots on ferrocrete, the metallic scrape of bolters being brought to bear. They were close, perhaps too close, but I moved with urgent precision, a blur of black ceramite against the dim, dust-choked air, my focus now entirely on the astropathic relay console. Every shadow was my ally, every piece of debris a potential screen. My movements were fluid, economical, a lifetime of training in evasion and close-quarters combat, allowing me to navigate the chaotic space with deadly grace. It stood before me, a monumental structure of ancient scarred plasteel and flickering data slates, its core a complex array of psychic resonators and warp-dampening coils. It was an antique, certainly, but its design spoke of the Imperium's golden age, a time when such devices were built to last millennia. Despite the dust and neglect, the faint hum of its internal systems indicated it was still functional, at least in part. This was my only chance. I reached out with a gauntleted hand, my fingers tracing the cold, smooth surface of the primary control panel. The interface was archaic, demanding a direct neural link or the precise manipulation of physical controls. I chose the latter, my digits, accustomed to the intricate mechanisms of my bolter, and the delicate touch required for field repairs, moving with practiced ease. My internal data slate projected schematics of similar relays, cross-referencing ancient Imperial designs with what my Auspex was now feeding me. The Red Talons were fanning out, their search patterns systematic, closing in. I had precious little time. First, I needed to bypass their security lockdown. The console was clearly under their control, its primary functions restricted. My gauntlet's integrated data spike extended, a needle-thin probe of hardened ceramite and microcircuitry. I plunged it into a diagnostic port, feeling the resistance of ancient firewalls, the digital defenses of a bygone era. They were robust, but not insurmountable. My armor's cogitator whirred, processing data at a blistering pace, running decryption algorithms. I felt the faint surge of data, a stream of encrypted code flowing into my systems. The Red Talons were shouting now, their voices closer, their anger palpable. "Check the main console! He must be trying to access the relay!" A burst of static, then a flicker of green on a diagnostic screen. Access granted. I'd bypassed their primary lock. Now the true work began. I needed to establish a connection to Tuarua. My knowledge of astropathic protocols was extensive, gleaned from centuries of chapter lore and the teachings of our own librarius. But this was not a standard transmission. This was a desperate, long-range attempt through a fractured galaxy across the very maw of the Great Rift. I began inputting the ancient encoded coordinates for Tuarua, a sequence of stellar alignments and warp lane vectors known only to our chapter. Each input was precise, my fingers dancing over the holographic interface that shimmered into life on the console. The air around the relay began to crackle, a low thrum building in the massive structure. Psychic energy. The relay was waking. As I worked, the Red Talons entered the main chamber. I heard their gasps, their shouts of alarm as they saw their incapacitated brothers. Their vox chatter exploded with renewed fury. "He's here! By the Emperor's blood, he's at the console! I ignored them, my focus absolute. I knew my presence was now confirmed, but every second I gained was a second closer to Tuarua. Their bolters opened fire, a storm of explosive shells. Bolter rounds slammed into the ferrocrete around me. Each impact a jarring, concussive force that sent chips of rockcrete exploding. I moved, a constant shifting target, ducking behind the console's bulky frame, rolling beneath a burst of fire, using the very chaos of their attack as my cover. My armor groaned, its integrity alarms flaring, not from direct hits, but from the near misses, the concussive force of detonations close by. I felt impacts, yes, glancing blows that scraped ceramite, but my speed and evasiveness kept the direct armor-piercing hits from finding purchase. I was an obsidian blur against the dim light, a target they could not quite lock onto amidst the swirling dust and the echoing gunfire. "He's at the console! Focus fire!" a voice bellowed, closer now. I could hear the heavy thud of Terminator boots impacting the ground, the snarl of chain blades. They were almost on me. But the signal, was it enough? A final, agonizing surge of energy. The black stone pulsed violently, then went dark. The console's hum died down to a faint whisper. The connection was severed. I had done all I could. I ripped my hand away, my vision momentarily blurred, a phantom ache lingering behind my eyes. I didn't hesitate. My mission here was complete. I had sent the signal. Now I needed to escape. I sprinted towards a concealed section of the warehouse, a heavy blast door leading to an external loading bay. With a surge of my armor's strength, I forced the ancient mechanism open, revealing the ash-swept landing pad outside. There, nestled amidst the debris, was the Manta Ray, my personal void skimmer. Its sleek obsidian hull was designed for rapid atmospheric insertion and extraction, a silent hunter in the void. As the Red Talons burst into the main chamber, their bolters roaring, I was already clambering into the cockpit. The canopy sealed with a hiss, and with a surge of its grav thrusters, the Manta Ray lifted, a dark blur against the twilight. Rounds hammered futilely against its ceramite-reinforced hull as I shot skyward, leaving the furious space marines far below. Within seconds, I had left the furious Red Talons and the silent, pulsing relay console behind. They would find only unconscious bodies and the lingering question of what had just happened. The signal was sent. Now, only time would tell if Tuarua heard the echo of its lost sons. 6. Judgments in the dust. The thundering footsteps of the Red Talons' reinforcements finally reached the main warehouse chamber, their heavy boots crunching on the ash-dusted ferrocrete. Captain Varentis led the vanguard, his Marker 7 power armor a stark crimson against the gloom, his storm-battered Aquila gleaming. Behind him marched 8 battle brothers, their bolters held ready, their expressions grim. With them, a figure of less imposing stature but undeniable authority, Interrogator Fiscal Nare, her robes of office swirling around her lean frame, her bionic eye whirring softly as it scanned the chaotic scene. Varentis halted, his gaze sweeping across the wreckage. The air still hummed faintly with residual psychic energy from the relay, and the acrid scent of ozone mingled with the pervasive ash. His initial assessment was one of grim satisfaction. The intruder, a rogue Astartes by the looks of it, had been engaged, but then his eyes fell upon his fallen warriors. The first Red Talon, the heavy assault marine, lay slumped against the shattered remains of a pillar, his power fist inert, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The chainblade specialist twitched by the sparking generator, his weapon's whine now a dying gasp. The shield-bearer, his faceplate caved in, lay motionless near the steel pillar where his hammer was still embedded, vibrating faintly. And scattered amongst them, the cask enforcers, all unconscious, some clutching broken limbs, others simply sprawled in the ash. Varentis's vox grill crackled. "Report, casualties?" A battle brother knelt beside the shield-bearer, his auspex sweeping over the prone form. "No fatalities, Captain. All incapacitated, severe blunt force trauma, joint dislocations, neural shocks, clean strikes, almost surgical in their precision." Varentis frowned, a deep crease forming between the brows of his helmet. "No deaths. By the Emperor's blood, they knocked my warriors down without killing them. It defies logic. What kind of heretic fights like this?" The Red Talons were renowned for their ferocity, their absolute commitment to the kill. For an Astartes to engage them and leave them alive was not merely unusual, it was an affront to their very nature, a puzzle that gnawed at Varentis's disciplined mind. Interrogator Fiscal Narai stepped forward, her bionic eye glowing with an internal light as it continued its rapid, comprehensive scan. She moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her seemingly fragile human form, her authority derived from the vast, terrifying power of the Inquisition. "Single operator," she stated, her voice calm, almost detached, cutting through the Red Talons' frustrated murmurs. "No lethal strikes. Controlled engagement. Remarkable." Her gaze lingered on the unconscious forms, then shifted to the patterns of destruction. The impact vectors, the energy signatures, consistent with Astartes-level strength, but applied with extreme restraint. This was not a renegade seeking to slaughter. This was a message. Varentis turned to her, his helmet canted slightly. "A message? What message, interrogator?" His voice was laced with suspicion. The Inquisition often saw shadows where none existed, but Narai was known for her cold, precise logic. "They came for the data," Narai said, her hand gesturing towards the astropathic relay console. She moved towards it, her bionic eye focusing on the primary interface. "And they found it." Her gaze fell upon a black stone slate, left carelessly on the console's surface. It was a simple, unadorned piece of obsidian, yet etched into its dark surface was a single elegant glyph, a breaking wave, the symbol of the Obsidian Spears. Varentis's posture stiffened. Obsidian Spears. They were lost to the warp a decade ago, presumed purged or fallen. The name was ancient, almost mythical. A chapter whispered about in hushed tones, their fate a grim warning. The slate pulsed faintly, a soft internal light radiating from the etched glyph. Narai's data slate, connected to her bionic eye, began to display a stream of data. "Astropathic echo recovered," she announced, her voice gaining a note of surprise. "Signal integrity, 14%. Origin, Tuarua. Status, uncorrupted." Varentis took a step closer, his heavy boots silent on the ash. Tuarua? Their homeworld? But that system was swallowed by the Cicatrix maledictum. It should be a dead zone, a warp-fouled ruin. The implications were staggering. If Tuarua still existed, if it was uncorrupted, then everything they thought they knew about the Great Rift's eastern reach was wrong. Narai continued, her fingers flying across her data slate's controls, pulling up more information, cross-referencing ancient Imperial records with the new data. The echo is weak, fragmented, but undeniably pure. No taint of chaos, no psychic residue of corruption. And the temporal distortion. It aligns with their own accounts. 12 years lost to the warp, 5 months to them. She looked up, her bionic eye fixing on Varentis. "Captain, this is unprecedented. A loyalist chapter swallowed by the greatest warp storm in history, and they emerge untainted, unbroken." Varentis shook his head slowly, the metallic rasp of his neck joint audible. His mind, accustomed to the rigid doctrines of the Red Talons, struggled to reconcile this new information. Their chapter's very existence was predicated on the ruthless extermination of traitors, yet here was evidence of loyalty, of a purity that defied the grim reality of the dark Imperium. "They are ghosts returned from the void," he murmured, the words almost a prayer, "and the galaxy does not know what to make of them." His initial rage, the ingrained hatred for any unknown Astartes, began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of bewilderment. Narai nodded, her expression unreadable. "Indeed, the Imperium moved on without them, Captain. It has hardened, grown suspicious, learned to see heresy in every shadow. But the Obsidian Spears, they still fight for an Imperium that no longer recognizes them. They are an anomaly, a variable in a universe that demands simple answers." She gestured to the slate again, reading its final inscription, a simple, elegant statement etched beneath the wave glyph. "We remember the tide remembers us." "V. A declaration of enduring loyalty," Nari interpreted. "A promise. They are not here to wage war on the Imperium. They are here to find their way home, and to understand what has become of the galaxy they left behind." Her voice was quiet, but her words carried the weight of Imperial authority, the cold, impartial judgment of the Inquisition. Varentis stood silent for a long moment. the wailing alarms and the shouts of his battle brothers fading into the background of his thoughts. The raw, visceral certainty of his duty to eradicate all threats to the Imperium warred with the undeniable evidence before him. An untainted chapter, returning from beyond the rift, seeking only their lost home. It was a concept almost too hopeful for this grim age, but the evidence was clear, and an inquisitor, even one as enigmatic as Narai, did not make such pronouncements lightly. He finally spoke, his voice low, the command cutting through the remaining tension in the chamber. "Rescind the kill order. All units stand down. They're not enemies." The words felt strange on his tongue, a concession to a truth more complex than he was accustomed to. He looked at the unconscious forms of his battle brothers, then back at the silent relay console. A new kind of war was brewing, not against the obvious foes, but against the very nature of a fractured Imperium. The Obsidian Spears were not a threat, but a symptom of a deeper wound, and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. 7. Return to the void. The manta ray sliced through the thin atmosphere, its grav thrusters burning with silent efficiency. I pushed its engines to their limits, the planet falling away beneath me, a mottled sphere of grey and black. I wove through the skeletal remains of forgotten orbital platforms, their rusted gantries and broken comm arrays like grasping fingers reaching for a sky that offered only the malevolent glow of the cicatrix maledictum. The ash-choked plains stretched endlessly below, a monochrome canvas of ruin, shrinking with every passing second. My auspex, now free from the jamming of the Red Talons, painted a grim picture of the world below. No significant life signs, no active energy signatures beyond the relay site, just desolation. It was a stark reminder of the galaxy's decay, a silent testament to the horrors unleashed by the Great Rift. High above, a familiar silhouette resolved itself against the distant, swirling chaos of the rift, the Te Toka Ahi. My strike cruiser, a colossal leviathan of black ceramite and ancient steel, its hull scarred but proud, a silent sentinel in the void. Its form, sleek and angular, was designed to cleave through both the void and the crushing depths, a testament to the unique engineering of our chapter. It hung motionless, a dark shard against the distant stars, its weapon ports closed, its engines humming softly, patiently awaiting my return. I aligned the manta ray with the cruiser's primary docking bay, a vast maw that opened silently into the ship's belly. The void skimmer slid smoothly into the hangar, its grav thrusters powering down with a soft whine. The heavy outer doors hissed shut behind me, and the airlock cycled with a familiar thrum. The cockpit canopy retracted, and then the inner doors opened, revealing the familiar, sterile interior of our vessel. The scent of ozone and recycled air, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the void, was a welcome embrace. Captain Tivo waited at the edge of the docking platform, his Mark VII armor, darker than mine from the constant immersion in the void, gleaming under the internal lights. His posture was rigid, his face unreadable behind his helm, but I knew the questions that burned behind his visor. He was the most stoic of my battle brothers, a rock against the shifting currents of the galaxy, but even his patience had limits. "Did you find it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble through his vox grill. I held up the black stone slate, its surface still faintly warm from the psychic surge. "Tuarua endures." The words hung in the air, a fragile hope in the overwhelming darkness of the galaxy. Tevao inclined his head, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. It was not a celebration, not yet, but a profound relief. The heart of our chapter, our ancestral home, still beat. "And the Imperium," he pressed, his voice devoid of emotion, but I sensed the underlying tension. He knew what I had faced, the accusations, the hostility. I gazed out through the reinforced viewport of the docking bay, towards the shattered stars that flickered above the dead world. I remembered the cold, suspicious eyes of the Red Talons, their unreasoning hatred, their willingness to condemn without question. I recalled the frantic, broken vox chatter I'd intercepted, the desperate pleas from systems consumed by war and plague, and the star charts, vast silent regions where Imperial light had once shone, now swallowed by the encroaching shadows of the Great Rift. "Afraid," I said softly, the word bitter in my mouth, "angry, tearing at its own shadow. It is precisely as we left it, only more so." I paused, the full weight of the galaxy's fractured state pressing down on me. They are consumed by their own fear, by internal conflict. They see traitors where there are none, and turn their weapons upon their own. The oppression we knew has only tightened its grip, the dogma grown more absolute. It was a bitter truth, one that would be hard for my brothers to accept, yet one they had always understood on some fundamental level. The Imperium we had sworn to protect had always been a brutal, unforgiving entity, and it seemed its trials had only sharpened its cruel edges. Tevot said nothing, his own gaze following mine as if he too could see the fractured galaxy through the viewport. His silence was not a lack of understanding, but a profound shared grief. He knew the cost of such fear, the price of internal strife. I added, my voice firming with renewed resolve, "They still fight, so do we." Our purpose remained, even if the Imperium had forgotten its own. We were the Obsidian Spears, and our loyalty was to the Emperor, and to the ideals he had forged, not to the flawed, corrupted institutions that now claimed his name. Our path was clear, to return to Tuarua to protect our home, and to fight the true enemies of mankind wherever they might be found. As I spoke, I moved towards the ship's main data cogitator, a massive ancient machine spirit that hummed with the collective knowledge of our chapter. I had intercepted fragmented data bursts during my infiltration, whispers of something new, something impossible amidst the general chaos. I needed to confirm it. My gauntlet interfaced with the console, my thoughts flowing into the machine spirit, bypassing the usual protocols, demanding access to all recent Imperial data streams, no matter how corrupted or incomplete. The data slate on the console flickered, then resolved into a torrent of information. Battle reports, astropathic communiques, Imperial decrees, all of it filtered through the lens of a galaxy in utter disarray. Most of it was grim, tales of worlds falling, of endless war against Xenos and heretics, of the Great Rift's relentless expansion. But then, a pattern emerged. Recurring references, at first dismissed as propaganda or fevered dreams, began to coalesce. Reports of impossible victories, of strategic genius, of a unifying presence. My internal chronometer struggled to reconcile the dates. This was recent, within the last few years of real space. My eyes, scanning the rapid scroll of text, landed on a specific series of reports. Cardia, Eternal Cardia gone. The Terran Crusade. The Battle of Luna. Names that belonged to ancient history, yet were described as current events. And then, the name that made my enhanced heart skip a beat. Indomitus Crusade. The words were accompanied by images, grainy and distorted but undeniable. Vast fleets, legions of new space marines, their armor gleaming, their purpose clear. And at the forefront, a figure, a primarch, ancient and noble, yet imbued with a vibrant, living presence. A figure in azure and gold, bearing the sword of the Emperor. He was leading this crusade, this impossible counter-offensive against the encroaching darkness. My Vox grill crackled, not with my own voice, but with the raw, unfiltered data stream from the cogitator, projected for Tevot and the nearby tech priest to see. The image of the Primarch solidified, his features resolving into a face I knew from the most sacred of our chapter's archives, a face that should have been forever frozen in the amber of history. Robut Guilliman, Tevot breathed, the name a whisper of awe and disbelief. The avenging sun, he walks among us once more. The word struck me with the force of a macro cannon shell. Guilliman, the Lord of Ultramar, the architect of the Codex Astartes, the one who had laid the foundations of the Imperium we knew long before the Great Rift. He was a legend, a myth, a figure from the history scrolls, not a living, breathing being. His return changed everything. The fractured Imperium, the desperate fight, the very nature of our lost chapter's purpose. It all shifted in that single impossible moment. The galaxy, it seemed, was not entirely lost to darkness after all. A new tide was rising, and with it perhaps a new purpose for the Obsidian Spears. Don't forget to comment, like, and then subscribe if you have enjoyed this story.